Hello and welcome to the Map of Mythical Monsters series. I am on a quest to discover a new legendary creature from every state in the country. So each episode I will identify a local myth from existing accounts and descriptions from which I paint my own unique interpretation and accompany it with an original story that I have written and narrated. I hope you enjoy our little adventure. This week we travel to Idaho. Home to millions of acres of protected wilderness, Idaho is the birthplace of many tales of cryptids and creatures that roam its lands. One such creature hides deep within the range of the aptly named Seven Devils Mountains. Let me tell you a story of the Dwarves of Hell's Canyon. The sun began to set on yet another unproductive day in the mines. Watching the rest of the men begin their journey home, Wilburn instead ventured along the mountainside, where he could spend the last remaining moments of daylight hunting for a potential clue to undiscovered ore. He couldn't bear the thought of returning even one more night to that small cabin empty-handed, where his sweet wife Mabel and their newborn daughter Rose waited anxiously for his return. Using his pickaxe as a makeshift walking stick and gripping the handle of a lantern borrowed from the mines, Wilburn continued his hike along the rough terrain, eagerly searching for the telltale veins of silver that would appear within the stone. The day would soon be over, and the precious light that would reveal the stubborn secrets kept by these mountains would be lost to the night. His doubt and frustration mounting, the reluctant miner turned around as if to make for his home. Just then, a gentle breeze picked up around him, flowing down from the canyon behind. As the wind rustled through the tall, dry grasses, Wilburn thought he could hear a collection of notes on the air. Turning towards the canyon, he closed his eyes to better make out the odd tune. A mournful melody that seemed to be both hummed and whistled at the same time echoed down the canyon walls. Following the sounds of the sorrowful song, he ventured further into the canyon. The path became steep and treacherous, much of his steps finding nothing but loose rock and slick shale. Before long, the sun made its final bow behind the mountain peaks, and long shadows turned into a blanket of ink that covered the land. Having traveled deeper into the chasm, the melody was loud and unsettling. An irrational fear threatened to overtake him, but he continued to press forward, giving in to a stubborn curiosity. Ahead of him, the bluff he'd been climbing came to a sudden plateau. The music, which had crescendoed into an ominous howl, began to fade, and no sooner had it begun did it altogether dissolve back into the sounds of the abating breeze. Dropping his pickaxe and gently setting the lantern on the ground, Wilburn fished for one of his matches from his pocket. Shielding the flame from the still present breeze, he lit the lantern and sat beside it. It was near full dark now, and he was nervous of the steep shoulder he had been hiking along. He couldn't see exactly how far down it was off to his left, but he shuffled backwards toward the mountain wall just in case. Lifting his lantern and swinging it about, Wilburn was surprised to find no wall at all, but instead a crude opening in the side of the mountain that appeared to tunnel deep inside. Gathering his wits and what courage he could muster, Wilburn lifted his lantern in front of him and took a few small steps into the cave. Unexpectedly, the hallway quite naturally progressed deeper into the darkness, with both a smooth floor and walls spaced far enough apart to encourage a lengthy expedition. After about 20 paces of careful and deliberate strides, Wilburn halted his progress as the glisten of a familiar metallic sheen filled his vision. It was the unmistakable reflection of silver ore. No sooner had he finished scanning over the newly found room than did he realize the very walls and floor were made of nothing more than the treasure itself. Shaking with disbelief, his eyes glistened with tears, and a mad laugh rose from his belly. He hastily placed the lantern on the ground, lighting the length of the wall before him. Gripping the pick in his hand, a strange and overwhelming desire took possession over him. With a wild yell, he swung the pick with all his might, the hardened point plunging deep into the wall, nuggets of silver raining down upon the floor. Pulling back the handle, he swung a second time, a third, a fourth, each swing more violent and desperate than the last. The floor was covered in the precious rubble, but he could not be bothered. His feral laugh returned, and he pulled his two-handed grip back above his head, preparing for his next swing, when from the depths of the mine came an inhuman shriek. "Who dares disturb my treasure?" Before he could react, the pickaxe that he was so confidently wielding before slipped from Wilburn's hands and clattered to the cave floor. The blood seemed to drain from his body, and he collapsed under his buckling knees. From deep down the corridor, a scuttling figure appeared, hastily dashing towards Wilburn. Features that were shrouded in shadow suddenly became visible, lit by the now haunting glow of his lamp. A grotesque, man-like creature standing maybe 3 feet tall flashed a mouth full of sharp and broken teeth. Large pointed ears topped a bearded head, matted hair covering its back and chest. Long talons on its hands and feet made loud clicking sounds as it closed the distance to where Wilburn sat huddled against the wall. Its head whipped side to side as it sniffed and snorted, locating the corner where Wilburn huddled. It was then that he realized the beast must be near blind, though it made small effort to locate his hunched form. Though standing not much taller than a minecart, the monster seemed to tower over the hapless trespasser. Wilburn could not bring himself to look up into those milky eyes. Instead, a clawed hand grasped his chin, lifting his head as the creature lowered its own. Fetid breath wafted into Wilburn's face as the beast opened its mouth to ask, "Who are you?" Oddly, though entering the chamber with a roar, the voice no longer seemed so malicious, but instead genuinely perplexed and curious as to the arrival of one such as he. Finding his voice, Wilburn replied with a stammer, My name is Wilburn." "Ah, and what is a Wilburn?" probed the beast. "Well, I'm a miner, a prospector. Please, my poor wife and child will be worrying after me," Wilburn replied. The creature seemed to perk up at this, but responded in a dubious tone. Sounds more like tricks to me. Tell me, my rather large thieving friend, how came you to my lustrous lair?" Taking a few more moments to compose himself, Wilburn replied, The music. I heard it and followed it up the canyon. I found this large opening and if I only had known, I would not have dared disturb your home." A small chuckle emitted from the dwarfish figure standing before him. Yes, if only you had known, indeed. Well, no matter. What is done is done. An honest mistake, it would seem. Wilburn breathed out, allowing himself a moment of relief. It really is too bad, however, that you were so awfully hasty with that tool of yours. You see, these mountains are quite greedy and rather protective of the treasures that they hold. As such, they cannot suffer any molestation of their hallowed halls. And so, unfortunately, my deceitful one, I'm afraid that for your transgressions, you must die. The words were spoken so tenderly that Wilbur nearly missed the harsh judgment passed down upon him. Once again he grew weak, mouth quivering and hot tears of despair forming in his eyes. "Ay, my poor little wretch, if only there was another way, I would most willingly be the means of your salvation. But alas, there is only one, and it is one that no traveler has ever chosen before." Wilburn's closed eyes, shut against the gentle sobs that had finally broken free, popped open with a start. "Please, anything that you would offer, I would gladly accept." Now, we shall see," replied the dwarf, a mischievous grin returning to his lips. "Once the words of an accord are spoken within these walls, there is no act that can sever one from his debt. Some would even find the sentence of death preferable to this pact." All at once the cave became very still, the flicker from his lit lantern dimming to barely a glimmer of light, the creature's voice taking on an ominous tone and cadence. "In place of thy life we demand a new fee, the sum of which are offerings 3.
A loaf of fresh bread wrapped in paper and tied, kneaded and shaped at the hand of your bride. Do not delay in its bringing, nor let it grow cold, and for this first gift take all you can hold. Of her hands we require some needle and some thread, to fashion us a cloak with a hood for our head. Be swift with the garment, do not dawdle nor tarry, and again with thy gift take all you can carry. Our final demand is of both bride and of groom, for to us you'll bring the cries of her womb. The body of the babe is all we require, and for this last gift take all you desire. Now speak your assent, and your life remains thine. Waver not from these words to another design, for a prize we will have of 3 or of 1. This is our decree and cannot be undone.
Now it could be said that Wilburn was too desperate to live, or that he understood too little of the incantation spoken by the dwarf, but what was a surety is that he had set his heart upon the riches of that fateful cavern, and seemed willing to give up anything in order to live and see those treasures enter into his possession. So even before the enchanting words had finished their echoes along the walls, he had declared, "I will do it! You have my oath!" The grin that teased at the corners of the dwarf's mouth widened into a sinister smile.
"Ah, yes, it is done then. Now go. You must make haste, for I expect your prompt return. You mustn't let the terms of your contract expire."
Grabbing Wilburn's hand, the baleful creature gently placed a rather large lump of silver into his palm, whispering with menace,
"To encourage a swift reunion."
And with that, Wilburn had made his way to the exit, accompanied by the sounds of soft but shrill laughter. Returning home, Wilburn made little explanation as to the hour of his arrival, only that he had discovered a secret that would be the answer to all of their dreams. Proffering the generous nugget of silver, his bride's dubious expression was immediately replaced with amazement and joy. Their excited laughter quickly turned to an enthusiastic discussion of his plans to return to the cave. They both agreed that they should tell no one, lest their newfound treasure be stolen from their rightful ownership. He would return tomorrow evening under the cover of night. At his oddly insistent request, Mabel spent the next day preparing a fresh loaf of bread for his trip. Ignoring her objections, Wilburn promptly dumped the hot loaf from its tin, hurriedly wrapping it in thick paper and tying it with some kitchen cloth. A quick kiss on Mabel's cheek and one for Rose's forehead, he impatiently gathered his satchel and tools and head out into the night. Nerves clawed at his stomach as Wilburn approached the opening to the mountain cavern, this time lit warmly from within. Taking awkward and uncertain steps into the mine, Wilburn returned to the site of his hasty excavation. Sat upon a large rock formed along the wall, he was greeted with the sight of his familiar host, a lantern at his feet.
"Aye, so swift and hasty indeed," cackled the dwarf,
suddenly crossing the distance between them, an outstretched hand beckoning for him.
"And what of my gift? Give it here now, give it to me,"
said the creature, seizing it from Wilburn's two-handed clutch as he removed it from his pack. Bringing the parcel to its nose, the creature closed its eyes, a loud snort and euphoric sigh escaping its nostrils.
"Still warm,"
he said with a sinister smile. Then, with the flick of a single talon, the cloth and paper were torn away, the loaf quickly devoured amid grotesque sounds of wet smacks and snuffles emitting from the gaping maw.
"Most delightful. Forgive me my indulgence,"
the creature said sheepishly, bowing his head and extending an arm behind him.
"Your reward."
Piled on the ground, what Wilburn had mistook for the dwarf's makeshift seat was in fact a veritable treasure trove. Gleaming nuggets sat heaped into a mound of solid silver. Without even realizing he had moved, Wilburn had removed the satchel slung over his shoulder and had crossed the distance to the pile and begun filling the bag. With a voracious greed, Wilburn had stuffed his pack to near bursting, unsure and uncaring of whether he could even carry the load. But slinging the straps over both shoulders, he eagerly exited the cavern, leaving the dwarf in the cave without a word. The reunion with his wife had been one of elation, as both nearly wept with joy at the sight of their kitchen table adorned in the precious metal. Their joy was short-lived, however, quickly replaced with a needy anticipation, immediately returning to plans of another trip up the canyon. This time, not even a small protest or inquiry was made when Wilburn requested a hooded cloak be fashioned for his return journey. The familiar hike had become easy, Wilburn barely relying on the lamp that he carried to light his path. Before long, he was entering the brightly lit tunnel of the mountain, the dwarf welcoming him with an elated applause.
"What glorious raiment you bring!"
Hastily removing the prized coat from Wilburn's grasp.
"And now, my hapless associate, the true intention of your return."
A recognizable sound of shoed hooves clopped along the hallway as a mule appeared, laden with bags nearly spilling with more silver. Once again, a delirious greed overtook him as he snatched the lead hanging from the mule's bridle and immediately ushered the animal from the cave, returning to his cabin in the valley below. Wilburn slowly rocked in his chair, the loose boards creaking beneath him. It had been days since his return, and he itched to set out again. Their treasure, now hidden beneath the kitchen floorboards, was a sum that neither he or his bride could fathom. But he wanted more. He needed more. He looked across the room to Mabel, who had retired to bed, complaining of fever and a chill. For hours she had been tossing and turning under the covers, but had now finally fallen asleep, the opium he had slipped into her tea taking effect at last. A soft coo interrupted his stare as he returned his eyes to the small infant at his side. Rose was nestled in her bassinet, fast asleep under her blanket. Hateful images and thoughts played through his mind, his stare darkening upon his daughter. He was so close. Just one final task and it would all be his. Tears streaked down his cheeks as he thought. Just one last offering. The amber light poured from the cavern opening. Behind him clopped 3 mules, steadily cresting the top of the bluff and onto the plateau. Numbly, Wilburn entered the chamber, the small, cloth-wrapped figure cradled under his arm, having long since gone cold and still. His beckoning host once again eagerly welcomed him in.
"Oh, long days did I wait, anticipating your return,"
cried the dwarf, an exultant tone to its voice.
Come in, come in! None could resist the bounty offered for this, our final transaction. Come now, give it me, we mustn't delay."
Wilburn stepped forward, reaching out with shaking arms, proffering the 2 tiny package before him. As with the loaf of bread, the dim-sighted creature snatched the bundle from his hands, bringing it to its nose, sniffing and snorting. The dwarf erupted into a joyous squeal.
Yes, yes, you have done well, my boy. It is yours, it is all yours.
The hunched figure gestured to the floor, spinning in a circle, cackling and choking on his rapturous laugh. And with that he scurried down the tunnel, retreating into the darker depths, echoes of laughter reverberating off the walls. It was only then that he looked down and saw an ocean of light reflecting the glow of his lamp. The floor was buried in silver. Removing all thought of the beast who had withdrawn to the inner sanctum of the mountain, Wilburn began his work in earnest. Frantically, he began picking up armfuls of rock, dropping them into open sacks. Anguishing over his desire to flee with his prize, the need for more consumed him. Although desperate to return home to hoard his treasure, he refused to leave a lump or nugget behind. Deeper into the chasm he searched, tearing his fingernails and palms as he dug and scooped with his bare hands. But as is the case for all, greed was his undoing. For as he ventured further down the hall, far from the light and his only escape, there came a terrifying howl.
Liar! Deceiver! Where is thy child?
The walls of the cave vibrating with its scream.
This is no babe, but a filthy swine. Where is the promised child?
Fear finally broke Wilburn from his avarice, but to no avail. The walls began to violently shake as the cries continue.
Thief! Oathbreaker! You bring your own doom!
A violent cracking reverberated off the walls. Rocks and sand poured from the ceiling, raining down as if from a great tempest. The horrible braying and whinnying of his mule team being crushed under stone, sending him into an auditory madness. Great splits in the floor opened up, swallowing his legs as large pieces of the wall and ceiling continued to fall upon him. He coughed and sputtered as thick dust filled his lungs. And then all at once, with a final crash and settling crunch, he watched as the opening to the cave was sealed and shut away. This cave of his great fortune now becoming his eternal tomb. And when the final rocks and pebbles settled and laid still, there was not a sound to be heard. That is, except for a low, mournful melody that seemed to whistle and to hum on a soft and gentle breeze. Accounts of the dwarves of Hell's Canyon date back centuries, but to this day it is said that those that travel the canyons and gorges of the Seven Devils Mountains can still sometimes hear that whistling and hum borne on a mournful and melodious wind. So I warn you, fellow traveler, heed not the lure of the mountain breeze, lest you too be caught in its fateful snare.